Tonight, a guilty verdict for the Boston bomber, but the question remains, will he get the death penalty? We'll present both sides of that case and debate it. Then, a police officer killing an unarmed man who was fleeing, and it is all caught on video. Yet another instance, white officer killing a black man. Question is it finally time for mandatory body cams for cops and other changes? Also, the fraternity named in that Rolling Stone article about rape on campus is suing the magazine now. But where is that line between sloppy reporting and libel? Good evening, everyone, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French, and as you can see, a lot to get to in the next 60 minutes. Tonight, though, we do start in Boston with that tragic bombing case. A few hours ago, a jury found Mr. Tsarnaev guilty on all 30 charges. It took them only a day and a half to reach that verdict. Now the trial goes to the penalty phase, where jurors will decide whether he should get the death penalty. A date has not been set yet for that. And I want to bring in our panel right now. Jim Kousouros, criminal defense attorney in Manhattan, sitting on the board of directors of the New York City Criminal Bar Association. He frequently lectures at New York Law School and the bar associations in Queens and New York, and also a visiting professor at the University of Birmingham in England. And Doug Von Noist, a founding partner of Carson Von Noist, focusing on corporate misconduct, selected by the Legal 500 as one of the most influential trial lawyers in the country. Mayo Bartlett, an attorney at the law offices of Mayo Bartlett PLLC and former chief of the Bias Crimes Unit at the Westchester County DA's office, and Mark Furnish, professor of Brooklyn Law, and he has argued before the U.S. Supreme Court. All right, we're going to get in a whole debate about this, but to set the debate up, there was no shock today that there was guilty verdicts on all 30 charges. But the question is, what about the penalty? What about, should he have life imprisonment without parole, or should he get the death penalty? And that is what the jury is going to have to decide probably in the next couple of weeks. All right, let us get those sides with opening statements from both sides. And we begin with arguing that Mr. Tsarnaev should not get the death penalty. And we go to Jim Kousouros for that.
There are two reasons that Mr. Tsarnaev should not be put to death. The first is the legal one, and that is the one specific to this case. While this crime was a heinous and despicable one, he was not the architect of the crime, he did not construct the bombs, and the evidence in the case rather clearly showed that were it not for his older brother, he would have never participated in this crime or perhaps any other crime. Jahar was only 19 when he committed this most heinous act, and I ask you to think back on the bad acts of other 19-year-olds who you may have known or you may have heard about, people who grew up to be responsible, remorseful, moral individuals. The bad acts of those 19-year-olds may have defined them at the time they committed the acts, but they did not define who they became as they aged. Aging and maturity can bring remorse, it can bring guilt, maybe even torment. If you sentence Jahar to life in prison, he will have his lifetime to come to terms with his guilt and maybe even to make his way back to the person he was before he allowed his brother to rule his life. And he will not be a martyr. But there's the bigger issue. There's always the bigger issue when it comes to the death penalty. There can be little question that it is these types of cases, acts of senseless terrorism, which countless lives are either taken or dramatically affected, that inspire our anger and retribution.
All right, counselor, you're at it.
He's grabbing his time. Powerful argument. Now let's hear the flip side, why the death penalty is warranted, and for that we go to Doug.
As a society, we are constantly making decisions about life and death, and we live by a moral code. And for the most heinous of crimes like rape, torture, murder, we recognize that this is a breach of a moral code. And as a community, we must address this, or else we as a community could fall into anarchy. Now, when we look at the death penalty, there are certain arguments that are made about the death penalty and while it's wrong. But one of the things is that we treat these defendants in a way that is not human. But in the reality, the death penalty recognizes the fact that these defendants are free moral actors who control their own destiny, and they choose to either act good or evil. And that's something that we have to address as a community. There's also an argument that it's inhumane. But the reality is, as a society, we are constantly moving towards more humane ways of administering the capital punishment.
Okay. Wrap it up.
Okay.
You didn't let me wrap it
What
up.
I was going to say is,
No, yeah. My God, you have to
the bottom
gag.
line
You can't
is
do off.
people fear nothing more than death. And if you're administering the death penalty, you're deterring the crimes the most you can as a society.
Okay, I'll start and then you guys jump in here, but
I feel like I was less than a minute, by the way.
yeah, well, they're quick on the trigger. So, Doug, here's my question.
No pun
Did it make a
intended.
difference if he killed one person or if he killed a dozen or if he killed 100? Is the scope of the crime, should that be a determinant or not?
First off, I should say I don't believe in the death penalty, quite frankly.
Well,
If
way
I
to
was
really play a convincing argument.
But
Yes.
the reality is, yes, murders happen all the time. Not every murder is a capital punishment murder. So we have certain categories we could say aggravated factors, and this obviously reaches the aggravating factors where he's using these bombs that could kill multiple people. That's the theory.
Well, what about the aggravating factor of what he did in the wake of the bombing? I mean, to me, that's the toughest hurdle that the defense has to overcome here. I wasn't really persuaded by likening him to another 19-year-old because this is way, way, way beyond the pale. But look what happened
I wasn't
afterward.
at 19. I wasn't doing that.
Yeah, I was the biggest dope at 19, but this is on another order of magnitude. What about what happened in the wake of this? I mean, that, you know, he could have been in the brothers' thrall and all of that, but I mean, he went on what was tantamount to another killing spree after the bombing. I mean, that's going to be a tough mountain for them to get
It is
up.
going to be tough. And when I liken them to 19, what I'm saying is, and we've talked about it before, the notion that a 19-year-old has developed in a way that we can put him to death for certain acts. What's I think more important is that you have to do a comparative analysis. His brother masterminded the whole thing. He took control of him. He manipulated him. And I think the evidence is clear that without his brother doing that, he wouldn't have done such a thing.
But does it make a difference, though? I get it if he was 14, 15, 16. But once you're over the age of 18, whether you're 19 or 29 or 39, you're an adult. You can fight for this country.
He's
You
talking
can.
about the relative culpability and
Exactly.
the relative development between him and the brother, and that's a powerful.
And-
Well, but
it is-
Doug,
and it is.
At 19, you can't buy a beer, can you?
No.
So we don't trust your judgment at 19.
Yeah.
So wouldn't you agree that if you're under 21, certainly your mind's still being formed? In fact, the whole raise the age movement is based upon the fact that young people make decisions that they wouldn't make if they were older. But I have a bigger question for you, and that is, would you agree that the death penalty is only considered depending upon who the victim is and who the perpetrator is?
Absolutely. There's so many things that are built into the problems with the death penalty that you can go on and on and on. I mean, I don't understand. I mean, if you're talking about deterrence, I don't understand how it deters anything. I don't understand
does-
what the
it does-
purpose
But wait. There are certain cases, guys, and I'll go through specific ones. Guy serving life imprisonment, he kills a guard. What are you going to do? Give him another life term? We've made points, and it still exists now. You commit treason against this country. You know, you facilitate the death of fellow Americans working in concert with the enemy here. That's different than if you try and rob a liquor store and it goes south.
But in theory, you could kill somebody in prison. You could kill a guard in prison, and it could be self-defense. So there are prison guards that do
Okay,
commit
but
crimes.
before we go down that road, though, Mayo, there are certain things where what is the additional penalty that's really a deterrent? There is none. And even if
But-
you don't
well-
think, and I'm not a death penalty guy, but there are certain cases where you tell me.
You're right. And there are cases where we would probably all agree you can isolate certain cases. To me, the bigger issue is we do not have a system that allows for it. We need to reject that urge in specific cases to impose the death penalty because we shouldn't be
Well,
imposing
bringing
the
it
death
back to
penalty
this
on
case,
anybody.
well, that's a different discussion than this case. I mean, the Federal Death Penalty Act for now is a fact of life. It's rarely invoked, rarely used. Isn't it? It's premature really to debate this about the case because I think what it's going to come down to is whether he expresses any remorse. That's going to be it. I mean, we don't know what this guy's all about. He invoked.
But didn't he have a
Well,
chance
yeah.
to do that?
He
Mark?
did. That's
He
what
wrote
I-
on the
that's-
screed on the side of the boat
But
a
a person-
Unabomber Junior here, where he took not only
Exactly
complete
right.
accountability, but he defended his actions.
But
He
you
had-
can
his
have
behavior
remorse.
in
You
the
can
wake of it
script
is gonna be a
remorse
problem.
and give the impression that you're remorseful. The bigger issue goes back to whether it's a deterrent. If it's not,
No,
it's
it's not a
simply
deterrent.
bloodless.
It's
And it's not.
retributive.
And if you
That's
look
right. It's
simply at
retributive.
suicide bombers are not concerned about going to court.
No.
Lots of people who have suicide by cop, they're not concerned about going
Not at all.
to court. And if you're insane, you're not concerned about going to court. So it's probably not a deterrent against the
not.
vast majority of the people who are going to commit a homicide other
retribution.
than in the heat of the
But
moment.
it is about retribution.
It's
And
about
so the issue is, are we okay with it being a purely retributive act?
And if we are, we're one of the very few industrialized
absolutely.
countries that still is.
And we have to also remember that, in this country, You know, you have 152 people since 1971 who were condemned to death that were found to be innocent. In 2014, 125
okay, but I
want
want to have it both ways here, Jimmy. Okay,
No,
I'll
but
be
you
upfront
can't.
about this. Well, I can in that if I'm going to look at each case separately, there is not a human being alive, including the counsel for Mr. Tsarnaev, who debate that he was the person who was party to this, who put the bomb there, who planned this, who executed the plan, then fled, and then right before he was shot and captured, defended his actions, okay? So there's no debate that he was involved in this. Not even his counsel debates that. The question is, should certain acts reach such a heinous level that retribution, even if deterrence is not even a possibility
you
here.
can't decide it in the abstract based solely on the act, notwithstanding how heinous this was and his evident lack of remorse and the horrific acts in the wake of it. I still don't think this is the. And I'm not categorically.
Sure we do. We look at it in the abstract. The Rosenberg sell nuclear secrets here. What do we do as a country?
No. But you have to weigh not only the act, but the person, the age, all the other things
And we
Jimmy
really don't
spoke
know
about.
who that is yet.
But you look at what happened.
But do we need to?
Yes,
You
it's got to
absolutely
be
need to.
reserved.
You
I'm not
absolutely need to.
categorically opposed to it. It's got to be reserved for the
And
worst.
you don't think this
of the,
case reaches
no,
that?
because of the age. And categorically, the Supreme Court has said the younger brain, the younger emotional development is not the same as an older person.
But, you know,
if he's 30, the brother, I think it's a slam dunk case. This is going to be a close case.
But you know, also, you don't want to second guess the way a lawyer tries a case, because this lawyer sounds like they did exactly what they need to do, and it is great. But the problem with a case like this is you're almost stipulating to all the heinous facts. I get it, but if you don't push back on some of the facts, you get to a situation like this where you're basically having a debate on whether you believe in the death penalty or not.
But there's nothing they can push back on.
Well, there are things you can push back on. All the evidence. Listen, evidence all the time has to be tested, how it gets there, how it's preserved, through its shading.
He's confessed to everything, given statements. What are they going to
And
do?
you
They're
can push
boxed in.
back on some of the facts here at the sentencing
Yeah,
phase
that's what
in
they
terms of what drove him to do what, you know, and what drove him after his brother was killed to do the things that he did. You absolutely need to look at the person.
Well, I'll
You're
tell you a
not killing the crime,
surprising
you're
number,
killing the person.
Mayo, at least to me, when asked Bostonites here, or people in Massachusetts, obviously most immediately touched by this tragedy, what punishment they'd like to see for Tsarnaev. The number here surprised me, at least here. Do we have it, guys? We can bring it up. It was 62% went for life in prison, while less than a third here thought the death penalty was sufficient here, and that surprised me. I mean, if there was a surviving member of the 9/11 attackers to this country, I'm not sure in New York you'd find that same sentiment.
Too young. People understand that they're filled with rage
Apparently
and
so.
contempt over what happened, but this is not.
life
the
You'd
case.
be
in
amazed.
prison is
There
no
are
different.
surviving members, people who've lost loved ones in 9/11. I have friends who've lost loved ones, and they are against the death penalty. And they were against the death penalty for Zacharias during that case. So their feeling was that it would not bring them any solace, it wouldn't bring them any comfort, and all it would be doing basically would be casting pain, not on him so much as on his family.
Well, you can
And
make
they
an
were
argument
innocent.
with these political crimes that they are not the worst of the worst because at least in their own twisted minds, they're doing it for some reason. The indiscriminate rampant killer who just does it to get off, I guess you can make the argument that that person is diseased and physically twisted, but that's arguably worse.
All right, and we're going to bring you at home into our conversation here. Go to Facebook and Twitter and sound off. It's the age-old debate here, but we have a specific face to this crime here. Should the convicted Boston bomber get the death penalty or life in prison? The folks in that jury will make that call here, and we're asking you to sound off as well. Go to Twitter and Facebook and answer that. And speaking of that case, we will go to our control room. They've heard both sides of the argument, even though Doug quickly abandoned his side here, and to see where you fall on this. Should Tsarnaev have gotten the death penalty? I feel alone on an island on this at this table. We'll be back with the court's decision.
Is that it?
What?
You want to fry him up?
Yes. We'll be right back. Stay with us.